The story begins in a garden, a perfect garden, a man and woman, naked and unashamed, living in harmony with their creator, a serpent, a forbidden fruit, and a catastrophic fall from grace. This narrative has shaped Western civilization for millennia, embedding itself in our art, literature, law, and morality. But what if this foundational story, this cosmic drama of humanity's creation and fall, is not original at all? Today we stand at the crossroads of mythology and history, where the comfortable certainties of tradition collide with the explosive revelations of archaeology and comparative mythology. The Adam and Eve narrative that billions have accepted as unique divine revelation now faces its most profound challenge. Overwhelming evidence that it borrowed, adapted, and reimagined far older stories from the ancient world. The Adam and Eve story in Genesis exhibits significant parallels with numerous myths and traditions from the ancient Near East, including Mesopotamia, Egypt, Canaanite, and even Greek mythology. What you are about to witness is not merely an academic exercise. It is a journey into humanity's oldest stories, one that may fundamentally transform how you understand religious tradition itself. The scorching Mesopotamian sun beats down on the ancient city of Eridu. A priest scribe carefully etches cuneiform symbols into a clay tablet. The story he records is already ancient. It's the tale of Adapa, the first of 7 sages sent to bring civilization to humanity. This is 1,500 years before Genesis would be written. In this Mesopotamian myth, Adapa is summoned to heaven by Anu, the sky god. Listen carefully to what happens next. Adapa, a remarkably wise man created by the god Ea, is summoned to the celestial realm of Anu. He is offered the food and water of immortality, but following the deceptive counsel of Ea, refuses this divine sustenance, believing it to be food and water of death. Consequently, Adapa, and by extension, humankind, are denied eternal life and subjected to illness and mortality. The parallels are astonishing. Both Adapa and Adam are the first men in their respective narratives. Both are tested regarding food that affects their immortality. Both fail this divine test. Both lose the opportunity for eternal life. Both actions affect all of humanity, and both are tricked regarding food that can give or take immortality by a divinity. The evidence is clear. The theme of humanity's lost immortality, central to the Adam and Eve narrative, was already circulating in Mesopotamia over a millennium before Genesis was even thought of. The great epic of Gilgamesh, written around 2100 BCE, we encounter Enkidu, a wild man created from clay by the goddess Aruru. Most scholars recognize now that Genesis was likely compiled after the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE, making Gilgamesh a staggering 1,500 years older than the biblical account. This timing is crucial. You know, the Israelites were conquered by the very empires, Assyria and Babylon, where the Gilgamesh epic was one of the most celebrated and widely distributed stories. During their exile, the Israelite scribes would have been immersed in Mesopotamian culture and literature, directly exposed to these narratives that permeated their conqueror's worldview. Enkidu is created as a wild man from clay by the gods to be a companion for Gilgamesh. Initially, he lives naked in the wilderness, coexisting peacefully with animals, much like Adam in the garden before Eve's creation. The narrative beats are strikingly similar. Enkidu lives naked and innocent in nature. He exists in harmony with animals, naming them as companions. He lacks a suitable partner among the beasts. A woman initiates his transformation. After sexual knowledge, he gains wisdom, but loses innocence, and he can no longer return to his former paradise state. After Enkidu's intimate encounter with Shamhat, the text reveals, after their encounter, Enkidu loses his connection with the animals, gaining wisdom and understanding, becoming like a human. Well, wouldn't you know, this mirrors the Genesis account where Adam and Eve gain knowledge after eating the forbidden fruit, becoming aware of their nakedness and losing their innocent state. In both stories, a transition from innocent harmony with nature to a more complex, knowledgeable state occurs through women's intervention. Genesis describes Eden as God's own garden, a place where a deity and humans dwell together, where divine trees grow, where pristine rivers flow. Is this concept unique to the Hebrew Bible? The Sumerian myth of Dilmun, recorded centuries before Genesis, describes. Dilmun is described as a pure and clean land, a paradise where sickness and death are unknown, and the gods walk among mortals. In Gilgamesh, we find another sacred garden, the Cedar Forest. The epic recounts the adventures of King Gilgamesh and his companion, Enkidu, including their journey to the sacred Cedar Forest, described as the gods' dwelling place, the goddesses' exalted abode. Both features profound similarities to the Garden of Eden, a divine paradise where gods dwell, a place of pristine beauty and perfection, sacred trees with special significance. Human entry into this realm leads to transgression. And guess what? That transgression results in expulsion and death. When Adam and Eve are expelled from Eden, they face a world of toil and suffering. When Gilgamesh and Enkidu transgress in the Cedar Forest, death and loss follow. These are not superficial similarities, but deep structural parallels, suggesting cultural transmission and adaptation. Among the many wonders in Genesis, one detail glows with symbolic mystery: the creation of Eve from Adam's rib. At first glance, this story feels unique, peculiar even. But beneath its surface lies a much older current, flowing from the cradle of civilization itself. In the Sumerian myth of Enki and Ningishzida, the god Enki falls ill, and the great mother goddess Ningishzida brings forth 8 healing deities, each born from a different afflicted part of his divine body. From his rib, she creates Ninti. Her name in Sumerian carries double meaning: Lady of the Rib and Lady of Life. The parallels are just too rich to dismiss. Both Ninti and Eve emerge from the rib of a male figure: Enki in Sumer, Adam in Eden. Both names pulse with the essence of life: Ninti, the Lady of Life; Eve, the mother of all living. Both are products of divine intervention, not natural birth. Both serve as answers to absence, gifts of companionship and completeness. This is no mere coincidence of anatomy or etymology. It is the echo of an older myth reverberating through the Hebrew imagination. The Genesis authors, shaped by centuries of contact with Mesopotamian culture, reached back into that mythic reservoir and recast it through their own monotheistic lens. In the Sumerian world, the gods healed through birth. In Genesis, the God of Israel creates through division. But in both tales, life is born from the body of another, and women becomes the living bridge between wound and wonder. The story of Eve is not a singular spark in darkness. It is a flame kindled from a torch passed down through ancient hands. At the heart of the Eden narrative stands the serpent, the tempter who leads humanity astray. But the serpent-tree combination was already deeply embedded in ancient Near Eastern mythology. Ningishzida is a deity associated with vegetation, the underworld, and often depicted with snakes, sometimes with serpent heads emerging from his shoulders. Some interpretations suggest that Ningishzida, in his serpent form, could be linked to the serpent in the Garden of Eden. The title, Lord of the Good Tree, also evokes the imagery of the tree of knowledge or the tree of life in Genesis. Throughout Mesopotamia, sacred trees represent connection between divine and earthly realms, sources of divine knowledge, symbols of immortality and life, objects of temptation and testing, and serpents frequently symbolize wisdom and knowledge, underworld connections, chaos and danger, immortality through shedding skin. These symbolic associations precede Genesis by centuries, millennia, suggesting that rather than introducing new motifs, the biblical authors were reworking powerful existing symbols from the cultural environment they inhabited. The most direct evidence for the borrowed nature of the Eden story comes from Canaan itself, the very region where ancient Israel emerged. Scholars Mario Korpel and Johannes de Moor analyzed clay tablets from Ugarit, revealing a stunning Canaanite myth that prefigures Genesis. Based on their interpretation of a clay tablet from Ugarit, they propose Canaanite myth where the first sinner was the evil god Horon, who transformed the tree of life into a tree of death. Adam, or Adamu, a divine being sent to restore life, fails after being bitten by a serpent, leading to the loss of immortality for him and his wife. The elements are unmistakable. A garden setting, a serpent antagonist, a tree of life and death, divine beings losing immortality, a male-female pair suffering consequences. This evidence suggests the Genesis authors weren't creating a story from nothing. Again, transforming existing Canaanite mythology for their own theological purposes. The firestorm of evidence now surrounds us. The Adam and Eve story emerges not as a unique revelation, but as a brilliant synthesis of ancient Near Eastern mythological motifs, reimagined through this kind of monotheistic lens. From Adapa, it borrowed the theme of lost immortality through a divine test. From Enkidu, it drew the motif of the wild man with animals who gains knowledge through a woman. From Dilmun in the Cedar Forest, it adopted the concept of divine garden paradise. From Enki and Ningishzida, it took the creation of a woman from man's rib. From Ningishzida, it incorporated the serpent associated with the sacred tree. From Canaanite mythology, it adapted comprehensive narrative framework. The Genesis authors were not plagiarists, but theologians engaged in what scholars call creative adaptation, transforming existing cultural materials to express new insights. Their genius lay not in inventing these motifs, but in how they reimagined them to express their unique understanding of God, humanity, and moral responsibility. But this raises profound questions for believers today. If the very structure of the Adam and Eve story derives from older polytheistic myths, what does this tell us about its historical claims? The presence of multiple accounts challenging the notion of a singular, purely original, and historically accurate depiction of human origins. When every significant element of a story, from its characters to its plot devices to its setting, can be traced to earlier sources, can we still maintain it's presenting a unique historical event? If this foundational narrative is mythological in origin and structure, what implications does that have for theological systems built upon a literal reading of Genesis? The journey through mythology reveals not just where our stories came from, but who we are as meaning-making creatures, constantly retelling, reimagining, and reinterpreting the great themes of existence. In the garden of human imagination, every myth has roots reaching deep into the cultural soil from which it grew. The question is not whether Adam and Eve borrowed from older myths. The evidence is overwhelming that it did. If these stories in my Bible never really happened, if there was no tree, no original man and woman made from his rib, no talking snake, no forbidden fruit, no punishment of death, then what does this do to the myth that all humanity inherited a dark corruption of sin, and we need the blood of a man named Jesus to pay it so we can be redeemed for a mythical man's fall? Why believe any of this any more than Adapa, Enkidu, the Dilmun paradise, Enki and Ningishzida, Ningishzida, or Canaanite mythology? The Bible is literally just another myth. Sure, the story is cool, but it never happened.